one thing that is really bothering me is that basically almost all the papers, in the first paragraph or sometimes even in the first sentence, directly start with incel violence, basically, which is kind of, yeah, I feel like it's sending really the wrong message. Followed by misogyny, statements of misogyny in forums, and it's basically twofold, sending the wrong message. Firstly, like, it's pretty sad that even though it's so few people that do these things, uh, they're basically being told that this is why we care. Like, this is the reason why we care. And even if you're looking at it from selfish perspective, you're basically encouraging bad behavior, because otherwise society doesn't care, and not even academia cares. Uh, Otherwise, if it's not for misogyny and violence. So yeah, it was really sad. And I don't know, would you like to say something to that? I mean, yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's interesting you brought it up, because certainly I've been guilty of that too. And some of it is, when, there's, right, thousands of academic papers published every day. So you do have to try to drum up, why do I care about this topic, right? There's going to be some topics that are going to be in and of themselves obviously important, right? If I'm doing cancer research, I don't really need to sell the audience, sorry, about why this is important or why they should care. Um, so yeah, I think that is a part of it, right? Is just, this is why it, and you think about, if I'm doing putting a grant application together, right, and I'm competing against people studying intimate partner violence or drug use or something like that, things that we know are very important. I really need to reiterate, hey, this is important too for these reasons. So I think that might be one of the reasons why we get that framing. Number two is that it is, I think, an attempt to orient the reader, um, to the context in which this is all happening. Um, how much space do you need to devote to that is probably the bigger question. Um, but I think it is important, even though I don't do the forum research, and I've written about why there's issues with that methodologically. There's no denying that they aren't places that we would probably call like really wholesome pro-social places. So knowing that that is the only environment where a lot of incels can speak to the personal issues they have, not anything that's misogynist, not anything that's condoning violence, but that's the only space they have. That's really important to know, because if incels existed and there was a bunch of really nice pro-social forums where they can talk about their problems and people are helping them and validating them and building them up and working on things, then we're probably less concerned as a society, because we go, well, maybe they're taking care of themselves, they've got some stuff set up. We'll study them, but the we have reason for optimism, knowing that they don't have that, and the groups have a variety of individuals there, and there is content that probably is not conducive to helping their situation or improving their sort of long-term well-being. That's really important for us to know, because it indicates that there is a need for maybe a better space for them, and it gives us an idea of some of the ideas and beliefs they might be exposed to. They might not endorse them, but they're exposed to them. So I think that's another reason why we see that really emphasized a lot, is just to get a bit of a contextual understanding of where incels sort of are in society. And they are, unfortunately, a bit on the fringes and in forums that have a whole host of content, ranging from fairly benign stuff to stuff that's more concerning.
the audience gonna laugh. I completely forgot to tell people what you are actually doing. I'll write it, of course, in the in the description. You're a forensic. I wrote it in the title, forensic
Okay.
psychologist. But yeah, I forgot to let yourself introduce yourself. But do you want to quickly do that now after
Sure.
15
Yeah.
minutes?
Yeah, I wondered when you jumped right into the question. I
Yeah,
was like,
yeah.
all
I
right,
was too.
we're
The
going.
technical difficulties always bring me out.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I'm a senior lecturer in forensic psychology, um, but I'm not the sort of clinical forensic psychologist. I'm in a research role. Um, and I've been researching incels for roughly 5 or so years, mixture of sort of survey-based and interview-based research, and just trying to enhance our understanding of that group and the challenges and struggles that they've experienced, and how they may contribute to where they're currently at, and how we can use that to hopefully uh, enhance their well-being.
Back to the original question. Thank you for your self introduction. So what you're basically saying is that it's really difficult to get to a certain extent. You really want to get attention for this group, and in order to do that, you basically have to basically have to use sensationalism to a certain extent in order to get the funding, the attention, because
Yeah.
otherwise, but that's horrible. Like that sounds really horrible to me, and that also speaks to academia. I mean, we have so many people that are like for if you just look at it numbers wise, and you have looked at it numbers wise, uh, this is so many people that we're talking about that have a severe problem and deal with like lots of mental health issues, and like this is really a big thing, not a small thing. And for society and for academia to only care about this, that we have to use basically sensationalism. It really reminds me of this emo time. I don't know, you were approximately the same age. You probably remember the emo times when we were like, I don't know, 14, 15, 16, 17. Like this time there were emos in school, and they were also like, I don't know if it was depression, if it was a lifestyle. It was obviously it was quite different than what we're talking about with incels, but with them it was the same. Like only like self-harm was basically society was only paying attention, and when it was about self-harm and stuff like that. um, what can we do against this?
Well, I think, right, as a society, there's a lot of things that are in need of our attention, and we can only focus on so many things. So we try to prioritize based on severity, right? So if you think about, let's think about disease for a minute. Imagine that my research is on a disease that you've effectively never heard of, and I go on the radio and I talk about it. You might not care, right? Well, there's 20 other diseases that are on your radar. Um, but then maybe I start telling you that actually the prevalence of this is much higher than you thought. Suddenly you might say, well, okay, well, maybe I do need to be more concerned about this. Or that, it's costing the health system X billion a year, or it's a very gruesome and painful disease to have, and it's highly genetic or something like that. You're always trying to reiterate why something is important, because we just don't have the capacity to focus on everything all at once. So I don't think it's that people are necessarily doing it for bad reasons. It's just, right, if we're going to fund a project on incels, that means we're not funding a project on something else that might also be very important. So you need to do what you can to make it clear to whoever your audience is why this is important.
Mhm.
And if I was researching a disease that only one person in the entire world had, I could try to form the argument, okay, well, every human being is important and inherently valuable, and we should be caring about this individual with this very unique disease. And while that all may be true, I'm probably not going to get funding to do it because they're going to say, well, what's the impact of the work you're going to be doing?
Sure,
Um,
sure.
all due respect to that single
Mhm.
person, but we're talking about funding that versus some other project that um, could potentially help tens of thousands of people or reduce burden on the healthcare system or alleviate symptoms. So
Sure, sure.
like
But
anything, we have limited resources, so everyone has to make a call for why their area is worth exploring.
mhm. But wouldn't you say that just I mean you know the numbers. I don't, but I'm just guessing that the numbers are really high in self-harm, right? And I feel like if the numbers were similarly as high in I feel like also that's one another disagreement I always have with my guests is with my guests that are mostly from the Blackpill is that I think that we still live in a pretty sexist society. And I feel like in this case, it's still like the old sexism, like where men have to be like men's problems are not that important, and when men are depressed and men are have anxiety and when men self harm, it's not that big of a deal compared to other groups in society. And I don't think that's the reason for that. I don't think that's is feminism. I think it's still the old gender roles that we have. Um, I don't know what you think about it, but don't you think that there is a bias here? That there is a clear bias where men killing themselves and being depressed and living miserable lives, basically nobody cares?
Well, I mean, I would agree that if you take a mainstream view of feminism, you're right that some of those rhetorics don't align with that. Um, it's interesting because there was an incel paper that just came out, like a theory-based paper and one of their criticisms of the mental health approach that myself and others have taken is that um, men don't experience mental health problems at the same rate as women do, which is true, but that doesn't negate the importance of still studying mental health or men's mental health. And that doesn't make it any easier for an incel to say, well, did you know that on average women have more depressive symptoms? Again, that might be true, but that doesn't help that individual in that particular situation. Um, so, there could be a number of reasons behind this. There's lots of talk about privilege, and certainly incels, at least by virtue of being men, come from a position that's historically held a lot of privilege. So there might be a little less sympathy for them as a result.
I don't
What I
think
think is
that's true.
more, I mean, I'm not saying that that's
Yeah.
fair, but
Mhm.
that's just, um,
No, I feel like that's not what they're thinking. I feel like what they're thinking is that most of the feminists are still used to gender roles where the man has to be strong. I feel like they're not feminist enough. If they would be
yeah, well, and I mean, that's
feminist
the other
enough,
thing, right?
yeah.
Men aren't usually very good at discussing their health problems. Um, and in general, right? Even like physical health, right? Like men are reluctant to go to their doctor. My chest has been hurt and I haven't felt my left arm for weeks, but I'm going to, I'll be fine. I'll stomach through it. Let alone mental health. Um, so, they're downplaying it, or they might be downplaying it at an aggregate level. Um, so, there's a bit of a problem because if incels are more vocal about it, people may then say, well, they're not very masculine, right? They're whiny, or they're
Yeah, that's
effeminate
what
or something.
society in general says, right?
Um, which which they might be very concerned about, um, right? Because of the sort of traditional forms of masculinity, a lot of them talk about how they struggle to align with those. Um, So they may feel that they don't have the flexibility of transcending those, right? If a big, strong, muscular man like The Rock or something comes out and says, that he's had anxiety problems throughout his life, people probably aren't going to,
It's funny,
say
like
nice
it's
things
genuinely
about him because
funny. It's genuinely funny. Like when a big strong guy like that, he's like it's still, even to me, like even if I know that it's not correct, it has some funny touch to it because of the culture we grew up in, and because I mean, to maybe 3 generations up, maybe it's not funny anymore to a certain extent.
yeah, but he's got the capital to be, people aren't going to say that he's effeminate, right? Because I mean, he's big, he's successful, he's very strong, he's athletic, etc. Um, Incels may not have that same kind of luxury, so they might be downplaying it. You talk about self-harm. We, to my knowledge, we don't have any research explicitly looking at incels and self-harm. I think there's some suspicion that certainly it might be higher than it is in the general population. But we're talking about a group that generally doesn't talk about it, and individuals who exist at the fringe of society. So if it weren't for, the online world, we probably wouldn't know that some of these people exist. Because they when I've spoken to them, they tend to describe themselves as introverts, so they're not people going out to events and parties. We know from some other people's research they're less likely to be in employment or education or training. So if you're not doing any of those things, you're probably at home. So they're very much kind of a secret or a hidden population. Um, so that makes it more difficult to relate to get to know people who are incels, and just by virtue of that, it might make it more difficult to care or to see the problems that they are dealing with as serious as maybe they are.